World War I, the Great War, the war to end all wars. Just ignore all those other ones, they don't count. Many countries took part in this war, but who was the best, who was the worst? There's only one logical way to decide for this. It's a tier list. Sorry in advance to like the 15 kajillion people that died, but we're sorting you and your countries into an arbitrary tier list because I need content. In alphabetical order, let's do this. What's up gamers, and welcome to my 3-point program on how you can be Austria-Hungary. Step 1, start a major European war. Step 2, lose at every opportunity. Step 3, die. Although all of the great powers can be blamed for the outbreak of the war, Austria-Hungary can probably be blamed the most. After all, they were the ones who declared war on Serbia. They sought to flex their muscles on the small Balkan country, but failed and had to be bailed out by Germany. Then they tried to turn their attention east to the Russians, failed, got a bunch of men captured, and had to be bailed out by Germany. Then the Russians attacked them in the 1916 Brusilov offensive, where they were so utterly crushed there was barely anything for the Germans to bail out. After this, they would play a supportive role to Germany for the rest of the war. That's a diplomatic way of saying they got their asses handed to them so bad they barely had an army anymore. The only place they didn't completely fail was the Italian front, which isn't too hard considering defending a mountainous terrain isn't exactly difficult. Plus the fact it was Italians, they lost the war to Ethiopia, and yet again the Germans had to help them out. In the midst of this in 1916, they also tried to betray Germany and make peace with the Entente. Overall, Austria-Hungary was just about as useful in this war's trench foot. E tier. Next we get to the cockroach of this war, that being Belgium. Although I don't recognise Belgium as a legitimate state, they had a surprising impact on the war. Infamously invaded in 1914 in the German Schlieffen Plan, the Germans thought they'd easily bully the Belgians into giving them their country and lunch money. However, the Belgians put up a hell of a fight, delaying the Germans and giving the Allies crucial time to respond and saving the Western Front from total collapse. The remnants of the Belgian army even fought on afterwards, topped that with a brutal German occupation and like their entire country being a battlefield. They stuck to the cockroach mentality and simply refused to die. B tier. Brazil joined the war in 1917 because Germany kept sinking their merchant ships for the funnies. The only thing they really did in the war was use their fleet to help patrol the Atlantic. However, they had little involvement on land as Allied High Command had difficulty deciding where exactly to put the Brazilian troops, and by the time they decided where to put them, the war was already over. D tier. Bulgaria, aka everyone's least favourite Central Power. Sorry, had to be one of you. But despite this, Bulgaria did way better than it had any right to. Having lost land in the Second Balkan War, Bulgaria was pretty angry and wanted it back. They joined in 1915 to help kill Serbia, and then tried not to die as it was constantly attacked by the Allies from the south. And even more so when Greece joined the war in 1917. But they managed to hold on until September 1918, where internal issues and the fact they were losing forced them to sue for peace. But quite frankly, it was a miracle they managed to get it that far. It was down to some good fortifications and determined resistance. A tier. China joined the war in 1917 on the Allied side in order to get the Kaisho Bay back, as they released it to Germany. You'd think they'd get it back, but this is China's century of humiliation, so they were legally required to spread them cheeks. More specifically to Japan, who made 21 demands on China. One of these clauses was, any of Germany's shit in China is now ours, and in return we promise 100% totally not to come down and burn your country for another 20 years. If you know anything about China during this period, it was in its warlord era. Everything was on fire basically. Because of that, they weren't able to send any combat troops to Europe, but did help in sending thousands of labourers who dug trenches and built infrastructure. E tier. France took the brunt of the fighting on the Western Front, with them having almost 6 million dead, missing or wounded. They endured the bloody Battle of Verdun, which the German mission was literally to bleed them dry. They fought viciously to defend their homeland, and for once and all proved who was right, the average Alsace-Lotharingen fan versus the average Alsace-Lorraine enjoyer. Although for most of the war their leaders were firm believers of throw men at the enemy doctrine, which led to a mutiny in 1917, they didn't let their enemy pass, so they're getting a solid A tier. And here we come to the hardest country to rank, but they're going in A tier. You might be thinking, but they lost. True, but let me explain before people start calling me a Kaiserboon. They took a lot of risks in the war. The Schlieffen Plan is a good example. It had so many variables that had to go exactly right. Russia would take months to mobilize. Belgium would not exist. The British wouldn't intervene on the side of Belgium. But considering they fought a two-front war while under a naval blockade and having to bail out certain allies, they did the best they could considering the circumstances. They had competent military leadership. I say military leadership as Kaiser Wilhelm was just about as useful as his left arm. They performed well, especially on the east, holding the Russian steamroller at Tannenberg and pushing them back, and with a little Marxist magic got the Russians to sue for peace, taking a large amount of territory in the treaty. However, them making the Hague Convention look like a checklist, and the failed Zimmermann telegram bringing the US into the war, even when they gave it their all in their last-ditch Western Front offensive, the Kaiserschlacht, with too many Allied reinforcements they were pushed back into defeat. But despite this, due to their really good efforts considering the circumstances, they're going into A tier. Greece in World War I is a very interesting case. For the majority of the war they were neutral. I say neutral because until 1917 they were pretty much occupied by the Allies, with a large Entente army at Salonika just vibing, completely violating their neutrality. But they didn't really have a choice in the matter, unless they wanted to end up like Belgium. Greece was deeply divided on what side to actually join. The king wanted to join the Central Powers because he was BFFs with Kaiser Nudelarm, whereas the Prime Minister was Team Entente. This led to a so-called national schism, where the pro-Entente side won out, them joining in the war in 1917. Greek troops weren't majorly involved in the war compared to other countries. Greece was mostly used as a staging ground to attack Bulgaria and the Ottomans on the Macedonian front. Overall, Greece's importance came from a strategic position rather than their ability. For this, I'm going to give them a C tier, but they're barely making it. I will sum up my thoughts on Italy in World War I with a simple poem. Pizza, pasta, put it in a box. Italy in World War I can suck my big fat cock. With 11 battles to Isandro to Caporetto. If the Austrians can beat them, into F tier, they will go. Next we have the land of the rising sun. Despite kicking Russia's ass less than a decade ago, Japan was content just to capture a few German islands in the Pacific and vibed making that cash. It also tried to bully China as previously mentioned, but other than that they didn't do much other than, make money selling arms. D tier. Next is the sick man of Europe. Despite existing since the 14th century, the Ottoman Empire in this time period wasn't feeling too good. They joined the war in October 1914 when the military provoked Russia into war. They didn't tell anyone, by the way, they just did it. They immediately tried to push into Russia through the Caucasus Mountains, which, to put it mildly, went terrible. The Ottomans were beset on all sides in the war, with them have to worry about the British in Egypt and Mesopotamia, the aforementioned Caucasus front, as well as the Arab revolt in their rear. They managed to hold on quite well, even defeating the British at the Siege of Kut during the Mesopotamian campaign. Just like the failed Gallipoli campaign, make dumpster fires look civil. But don't ask what they did to the Armenians, Greeks, Assyrians, prisoners of war. In overall performance in the war, they get a C tier. But due to the whole crimes against humanity thing, I'm sorry bud, I have to bump you down to a D tier. We've had Bulgaria, the most forgotten member of the Central Powers, and now for Portugal, the most forgotten member of the Entente. So much so that their own government forgot they were in the war. Germany declared war on Portugal in 1916, mostly due to their close ties with Britain. The Portuguese mostly fought in Africa, but sent a small expeditionary force of 55,000 men that arrived on the Western Front in 1917. But by the end of the year, the Portuguese were replaced by an authoritarian government who was actively anti-war, and whose leader was the former ambassador to Berlin, so take that as you will. So the Portuguese expeditionary corps was left to rot on the Western Front. Portugal gets a D tier because, I forgot. Romania joined the war during the Brusilov offensive, looking to grab some land of Austria-Hungary. Despite Russia not even wanting them in the war, out of fear of exposing their flank. They joined anyway, got immediately crushed, and thus go to F tier. Russia joined the war. Wait, Russia's never been in a war. Russia joined a special military operation in 1914 in order to protect Serbia, and quickly advanced into Austria-Hungary. However, after the Battle of Tannenberg, they were slowly pushed back until two revolutions brought them out of the war, with the Germans bringing a good chunk of land with them. However, a Russian army didn't just lose, although admittedly they did do a lot of that. Their 1916 Brusilov offensive was one of the largest offensives in the war, and was crucial and not only saved the French at Verdun, but absolutely annihilated the Austrians. And if the generals in charge of the northern part of the front had capitalized on the momentum, it could have very well turned Russian luck around. Unfortunately, discontent on the home front in both terms how the war was going, and wider discontent with the Tsarist regime would obviously lead to two revolutions, a collapse on the front, and ultimately defeat. But their performance during the first half of the war wasn't terrible, so C tier? Next we have the absolute giga-chads of the war, Serbia. Before they were doing some ethnic cleansing and bragging about their dad being a war criminal, they were a kingdom who hated Austria-Hungary. So much so when the Austrian Archduke Franz Ferdinand was assassinated in Sarajevo, the Austrians blamed them and thus sent them an impossible ultimatum and 48 hours to be their bitch or else. Austria-Hungary at the start of the war went on a quick punishment expedition which went well for the Serbians. Serbia versus Austria-Hungary was truly a David and Goliath struggle, if Goliath was heavily drugged up and off his normal pills. It was only when Bulgaria did a sneak attack from behind, and with some German assistance that Serbia actually fell. Even after this, the remnants of the Serbian army marched all the way through Albania, where they were evacuated by the rest of the Entente to continue the fight. Despite losing the highest percentage of population of any country in the war, conservative estimates put it at about 15%, they managed to put up a hell of a fight and made it all the way to the very end. A tier. The United Kingdom. Despite my deep need to put them in F tier to what they did to the lads, we should probably be fair. The UK did play an important role, but did quite poorly in said role. Joining the war after Belgium was curb stomped. The British had a small yet highly professional army, which was quickly curb stomped itself at the Battle of the Marne, where they narrowly avoided defeat. Since this video had been a bit too Eurocentric, I'm going to ignore the Western Front like it's a plague to highlight some other notable fuck-ups. Gallipoli, a brutal 11-month-long disaster that led to a slaughter of tens of thousands of troops for pretty much what amounted amounted to nothing. The Coup d'Alamara campaign, an attempt to capture the Ottoman city of Baghdad, which failed when the British and Indian troops besieged the Talakut, with every attack trying to relieve them failing miserably. It's not all bad though. Despite all this, they played an important role, and the outcome would have been very different if they had sat it out. And it must be pointed out the naval blockade of Germany was instrumental in lowering the German people's morale and bringing an end to the war. Overall, I'm going to give them a B tier. Now the US of A. The US didn't get involved until 1917. Up until then, they were happy enough to make banks selling supplies to the Entente, and in fact a large reason they got involved was the sudden realization of, oh shit, if they lose we ain't getting that money back. That on top of the Zimmerman telegram, where Germany tried to convince Mexico to attack them, which ultimately sealed Germany's fate. This might be a hot take, but by 1917 the Central Powers were already losing. Germany on the home front was suffering because of the British naval blockade, Austria-Hungary and the Ottomans were on the verge of collapse, and the only real success outside the Western front was in the East. And if I'm being really generous, on the Balkan front as well, but only because not losing is better than total failure. It's likely if the US didn't enjoy the war, the Central Powers would have lost the war of attrition anyways. The war would have dragged on slightly longer as American troops were vital in the 1918 offensives, but without America, it was likely the Entente still would have won, so on that reason, they're going into C tier. But of course, I'm forgetting the most important country of all, a country so involved and integral to the war, they didn't even sign the Treaty of Versailles. They stayed at war with Germany for 21 years afterwards. Our only country going to S tier is of course Andorra. Who the fuck even knows what an Andorra is? Thank you for watching. Make sure to join my Discord server, and if you disagree with anything in this video, you're objectively wrong. Bye.